All right, welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Slight issue there, and so we're gonna get back rocking and rolling here. Um, we lost connection, but that's okay. We'll keep going. Okay, so let's back up 2 steps, Paul. We were talking about Enlist E3, talking about weed control and yield, and targeting specific issues. So let's start there, and we'll keep rolling.
Yeah, so I guess I'm not sure what people heard or didn't hear, but variety selection I think is definitely key first in terms of yield. But it's going to depend if a customer or grower has water hemp or a specific weed that's totally out of control. That might be higher on his or her spectrum of picking a variety or selection going forward. So again, it depends on where you are, what the problems are, and everything else. But from a company perspective, we're trying to have both the high yielding soybean varieties plus the agronomic traits plus the herbicide traits that all come together with it in one package to make life easier basically for growers moving forward.
All right. So in hang on one moment. Oh, there we go. So in the perspective of, or with the perspective of, this helps us deal with some of those hard to kill weeds. It brings up the second part, which is, but does this create a volunteer nightmare? So Paul, how do we deal with, is it really an issue, or how are we dealing with it?
So I guess Jay, if you can bring up slide number 2, please. It's we really have to think about what we're doing, and we don't want to get into a situation where we have you know 2,4-D tolerance going down the road and everything else. I'm a big believer in a program approach where weed spectrum, and this is some data that Mike Cobra has showed. A 2-pass versus a 1-pass system for soybeans, average yield increase of 13%. And customers would say to me, Paul, I'm going to pay more for 2 passes, but I'm going to give you a 13% more yield. I'm going to have options to rotate herbicides and multiple modes of action. So we basically keep all the tools in the toolbox that we have. We don't want to get back into a situation where we're just spraying one herbicide family across the board and are going to run into issues going forward. So I, firmly believe in this. If we don't, start doing this now, we're going to pay a lot more down the road when we run into even bigger weed control issues in the future.
Okay. Now, all right. So let's unpack this just a little bit, in that we know we're dealing with uh, increased herbicide resistance of some of these weed biotypes. In thinking back to that point about PCR testing, and what are these weeds actually resistant to? Like, how important is it to know what I'm up against as far as herbicide resistance within the biotypes that I've got in my fields?
Very important. I'm going to use fleabane as an example, and just starting to see more in Eastern Ontario. Some fields are just polluted with it, but growers are, sticking to that one glyphosate approach, Roundup only approach, and wondering what's going on, and just not realizing that they're having these weed resistant issues out in the field. So that's, understanding what the problems are, what herbicides are resistant to, different options that you have out there. Going to put a plug in for Mike's the crop protection network hub, where you can put in weed specifics, different variety selections by trait, and then pick a herbicide program that's going to help you the best to control those weeds moving forward. From a company perspective, we're already working on our 4th and 5th generation herbicide tolerance for both corn and soybeans. We realize that there could be potential going down the road. So having that in the research phase, that if we do have to bring that out to the market in 3 to 5 years, it's on the shelf ready to go. So that's a little bit scary, Lindsay, but that's kind of the world
Mm-hmm.
that we live in right now. And if we can do more of this program approach, 2 passes versus one, especially things like water hemp, and really watching that moving forward, that's going to be a benefit to everyone moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now, so Allison, producer Jay, if you could bring up Allison's slide 1. Um, this, I think, sort of goes through some of the things we have to consider in putting together a robust plan for how we're going to deal with not only the weeds in crop or outside of the crop, but of course, what we might have to deal with volunteers. So, um, walk us through how we deal with the potential of volunteers, or do we not have to worry?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question again. And like, I know that you started this off with like the whole stack trade and everything. It's key to note that cross-pollination is already a normal occurrence that's happening. So volunteers are already going to be containing more than one herbicide trait. There's Roundup Ready, Liberty Link out there, and there has been for quite some time now. Right now, I feel like it's very key to remind guys. I feel maybe lots of them are done harvest already, but for the few that aren't, definitely check your combine settings. You have to remember that the seed going out the back isn't just lost money from your pocket, but that's also weeds that you're going to have to try to control in the next future years. You also want to take your crop rotation into consideration, have at least a 3 year crop rotation, multiple modes of action. So we talk about that certitude. It just provides another mode of action in your canola rotation. That's that pre-seed with a group 27 trimazone. And yeah, there's just multiple things that you want to go into when you're trying to control those volunteers. Another thing that you're going to want to do to get your optimal yield is to have a great plant stand. So you're looking for that 5 to 7 plants per square foot, and control volunteers so that you can actually maintain that 5 to 7 plants per square foot. Seeding rates is another thing to take into consideration. Grow multiple in vigor hybrids on a farm. We've already discussed some of those options. And then also protecting your investment. So whether it be a fungicide, whether you're looking at different seed treatments when it comes to flea beetles, cutworms, things like that, that patented pod shatter reduction trait is really key and has been for sure. I don't know what you guys are seeing in eastern areas, but the wind in Saskatchewan this year, we are like full blown Lethbridge style. So that's getting a little crazy down here too. So just another
Yeah.
thing to take into consideration to protect your yield.
So that actually, the harvest management part is one of the ones. So we talk about maturities and we talk about length of season for soybeans, and there's all sorts of reasons why we're going to choose one over the other. Potentially, maybe it's that we want to make sure we get our winter wheat in. Perhaps it's what's best for my area if it's canola, but harvest management does play in. What like from your perspective, Allison? Like, does the vast majority of your client base want that pod shatter because they're straight cutting or because they want the flexibility of letting it stand when they need to?
So it has changed over time, of course. We've had this patented pod shatter reduction trait now for 10 years, which is quite exciting for us. And some guys were even straight cutting prior to that. It's kind of a little bit more reassurance of knowing where your canola is too. That's one of the first things that growers told me when they started straight cutting. They're like, well, when I swath my canola, when we get those winds, it could be in my neighbor's field. Who knows? So it's just a little bit of reassurance there. But then the pod shatter technology trait has also made it so that we have the ability to do that and then the flexibility to also leave it out a little bit longer like you mentioned. That's obviously not ideal and we would like to still cut it, but it does provide a little bit more insurance for growers that can't get it to it right away or are maybe harvesting lots of canola acres, and if some ends up standing a little bit longer or if we do have some heavy wind and stuff like that, it just provides a little bit more insurance to these growers.
Yeah, for sure. Paul, aren't you glad that we don't worry about that? Oh, wait, we do kind of. Yeah. So on the harvest management side, when we're thinking soybeans, so I mentioned, being able to get the winter wheat in, those sorts of things. How important is it to make that call as far as the maturity rating we're going to choose for our soybean when we're trying to whittle down the list?
No, for sure. So we're getting a lot more growers that are growing winter wheat in our area in Eastern Ontario. It's just kind of skyrocketing in the last 5 years. And I always talk to growers about, picking a soybean variety that's at least 2 to 3 relative maturity days earlier. So normally we grow like an '06, an '09 to a 1.1 group, while looking at like an '03 and '04, 01, that type of idea. Um, I'm surprised Pete's not on here today because he'd be a champion for that, right? And the
Absolutely. Yeah.
benefits of having, we've been blessed this year with an early fall harvest, and guys are, wheat's been in for 2 weeks now. We got some wheat that's up a good couple of inches, but it's just that extra bushels that's going to add that extra 1 bushel per day. And so variety selection for soybeans is really critical to help that goal
Mhm.
basically for growers going forward.
So that we can actually have a 3 crop rotation, you guys. It doesn't just have to be corn and beans. Yeah, we can
Soil
we can
health
actually
too,
get a
right? And everything else.
yeah,
Yeah.
we could get a 3rd crop in. Allison's like, "Of course. We just do canola snow, canola snow." Just kidding. No one does that, everybody. We are very responsible with our rotations. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to throw to our last read of the night, and then we'll get back to wrap up our conversation on choosing the best variety or hybrid right after this. Our sponsors for the Agronomists are Beef Market Update, The Truth About Ag, and the Canola School. From preceding seeder setup and checks to pest insect identification and advice on nutrient management decisions to tips on determining swath timing, Real Agriculture's Canola School is a video series that tackles every facet of the canola growing season in an engaging and informative format. The Canola School is made possible through sponsorship by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. Check out more at canolaschool.com. All right, we are back. Go check out the Canola School. We have all sorts of good stuff on there, including things like straight cutting versus swathing, and scouting for club root. Very important. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left. Certainly, there are those considerations from the weed spectrum. I do want to touch on just quickly on the insect front. Allison, you mentioned, of course, the flea beetle and cutworm protection. How was that this year in your area? Because I think the past few years we've been waiting for the flea beetle apocalypse, and it wasn't maybe as bad as we thought, but still devastating for some fields. So where are we at on managing early season pests?
Yeah, I feel like this totally depends on your location and where you are and what your crop rotation, your history is, and everything like that too. I had some farmers that got away with not adding additional seed treatment to their package, just totally fine, no worries. And then the next guy that ended up having to go in and spray an insecticide maybe a couple of times and possibly regretted not adding that onto their bag of seeds. So I've had a little bit of both worlds, and it depends what your pressure is too, right? Like some guys are
Yeah.
in cutworm areas, some are in flea beetle areas, some live in this wonderful area where they don't get either of those things. So
Mm,
it just depends on your personal scenario. But overall, in the past few years, we've had a lot of flea beetles. So
yeah.
it depends if they get to that economic threshold or not. And yeah, lots of guys have had to go in and then do some cleanup spray applications if they maybe missed that seed treatment.
Yeah. Never fun. Paul, we had a lot of rain in our area of Ontario, other areas as well. How did we do on the seedling disease front on our soybeans?
Yeah, so I would say overall we saw probably more phytophthora and other root rots this year just because of the growing season we had. Again, I think seed treatment helps with that. So definitely take a look at your seed treatment package.
Mhm.
If you're selecting your variety, there's differences amongst companies out there, depending on the disease and everything else. And then there's also trait scores in catalogs that for phytophthora as an example that customers growers should be looking at to help them make selections here for next year and going forward.
Mhm. Okay, so we've covered that obviously we choose the highest yield and we go for each field 100%, right? No, just kidding. Okay, so yield, obviously, we know we start there, but that's obviously not everything by a long shot. So diseases, for sure, we have to think about. We have to think about our weed spectrum. We have to think about our fall harvest window and what else we might want to do. And we definitely need to think about our area as far as what's reasonable for our area. Allison, did we miss anything? Is there something that we definitely still need to add to that list when we're deciding?
There's always more to it. I think you covered most of them. Maturity, the standability, fertility, irrigation, of course. There's so many variables that make every farm unique. And so what they need versus another farm could be completely different. But those might be a couple of the other ones that I would add on. I know that there's a few irrigation growers that are probably dialed in. So they might take standability of a hybrid into a lot more consideration than somebody that's growing on dry land. So something like
Mhm.
that, high fertility growers that really want to put all that they can into growing the best hybrid ever. They might also take standability into consideration. Yeah, maturity, like you said, early season, we have some new early hybrids that really make a difference for guys along that Highway 2 corridor in Alberta or in that Peace region, whereas when you're in Manitoba, you might be fine growing a wide variation of mid maturing to long maturing hybrids as well.
Mhm. Good point about if you're going to throw the kitchen sink at it, if you're in a super high producing region. Certainly, we have that conversation on the corn side, Paul, on the flex versus fixed hybrids, which I still can't keep straight. But Mark asks, any seed treatments available or coming for aphids? Would seed treatments be an aphid thing, or is it too late?
So if you, I'm assuming Mark's talking about soybean aphids and everything
Yes.
else. We generally get
Yeah.
that 45 to 60-day control with the current seed treatments that we have on the market today. I don't know of anything that's currently coming out that's beyond that window. There could be something I don't know about, but that's what I know
Yeah.
about today.
Yeah.
I, I guess just trying
Sorry,
to
go ahead.
add another key point. I think is throwing your seed expert or seed salesperson, agronomist, or other person into that whole variety selection, because I know it's sometimes we get our blinders on in our own little world, but I may not have a problem that's on my farm, but 10 miles away, there's a problem with that same variety you're growing. And it's the people that are out working in the countryside that see it more that may be able to help you. Hey, before you go too hog wild on this, just be aware that there's this problem. And I always like knowing the weakness of a product. That's going to help me really position something with a customer going forward.
Hmm. Right. And especially in looking at something like, let's say, white mold, where we know, in a particular area, or sclerotinia, if you know that is going to be your number one disease issue, that may essentially throw out a couple options that just aren't on the table. But good point about, perhaps including your seed rep, of course, to have those conversations and to gain that knowledge as well. Wonderful. Okay, so that does it for time. Thanks everyone who hopped back on. Little blip there, but these things happen with live, and that's okay. All right, it feels a little bit strange to be done at 7 o'clock. I don't know what I'm going to do with my whole evening. This is very bizarre. Okay, so lastly, I guess we did have a couple people who asked, of course, where can they find more information on varieties or hybrids? There are a lot of different sources. Allison, I'll start with you. Where can people go for more on InVigor hybrids?
Yeah, so I am very excited because lots of my data is going up live onto invigorresults.ca. It comes in pretty hot, so that we're still adding on more trials as they get harvested, but it is there. We do have a coefficient of variability to make sure that the data that we do put on there is statistically correct and it's replicated. So that's where I would direct people when they're looking
Okay.
for hybrid selection for the 2025 season.
Alrighty. And Paul, people just call you directly, right? And you'll
Most
walk them through the whole table. Yeah.
okay.
No?
But no, like Pioneer.com within Pioneer, I'm sure there's other companies that have similar things on the web pages. And then talking to your local Pioneer sales rep, if you deal with them, we're sending them data sets, daily updates, what's going on, plot results, summaries, that kind of stuff, and go from there. And there's also, provincial trials if you want to check those out as well.
Mm-hmm. Ontario gets provincial trials. Not everybody has them anymore. Anyway, I miss them a little bit. Okay. All right. Paul Hermans, Allison Bishop, thank you both so much for joining me here on The Agronomist. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. And thanks for sticking with me, even though we dropped off a little bit there. And Warren would like to point out that he does call you directly, Paul, and have those
Yes, he
conversations. But
does.
not everybody's special like Warren. Okay. All right. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. Next week, of course, is Thanksgiving Monday. So we will not be on next Monday, but the week after that, we will be, and we're going to be talking sulfur. So join us 8 p.m. Eastern on what date is that? Oh, goodness, I can't even. I think it's the 21st. It is the 21st. Join us then. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Of course, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists to get those CEU credits. And we'll see you in a couple weeks, everybody. Cheers.